Saturday's wildcard day in FPL, and the only question now is whether I activate the trip before the game week 27 deadline or whether I wait until game week 28 and instead make a double transfer that could give me a huge advantage. And I know most people think it has to be game week 32, but they are overlooking one crucial factor. If you are not where you want to be in the overall ranks, if you want to reach the heights that may seem unreachable to most but not to you, then it is these next 5 game weeks where the most gains can be made, not the big run-in where our FPL teams will be largely decided by the fixture schedule. And look, I know I was all set on that game week 27 wildcard. I was all set to activate before the close of play on Saturday morning, but now I've had me man the D unit in my head and he has given me an idea, and he's done it unwittingly. He has done it without even realising what he is doing. But now I'm thinking, if I wait just one more week, if I wait until Saturday afternoon rather than Saturday morning to activate the chip, is that perhaps a greater advantage? And we're going to get into that because it all hinges around one transfer. It all hinges around one potential action which could be the pivotal factor in this strategy being successful. But we're going to get into the pros and cons before we do of the pros and cons of the non-32 wildcard, because I've been watching the videos, I've been listening to the experienced names, those big name content creators who know more than me, who may be more versed in the art of FPL than me, but perhaps are a bit one-track minded, perhaps are a bit too laser focused on this one strategy approach, because I watched them all and not one of them is discussing the possibility of wildcarding in a different game week. Not one of them is weighing up the potential for going early with the wildcard and the gains it can make. There are pros and cons, and it is a risky play. If you are high up in the rankings, perhaps it is better to go with the game week 32 wildcard and play it safe. But for me, in my position, it just isn't the right move. And what I will do is tell you the pros and cons of the non-32 wildcard. Now, the cons of going early, the disadvantages to going early are obvious. You have less information. You have no certainty around the fixture schedule. So when you are wildcarding, you are picking players, but you do not know if they will double. You don't even know if they're going to get through in the cup. That is the challenge. That is the risk. It's not one that is insurmountable, but it is a difficulty for people like us who will go early. The other main one is it's harder to prep the bench boost. Now, I know the bench boost it's a contentious chip. Some people think it is of massive importance. Others think it is, well, it's just a bit overplayed. You're talking an extra 16 points at most. Now, for me, in the DEFCON era, I actually think the bench boost is more powerful than ever. And it is a good argument to wait, because the bench boost, if you have 3 DEFCON daddies on your bench, if you have 3 players who can pick up the DEFCONs, let's say, for example, you went with a bench of James Hill, James Garner and Elliot Anderson, and they all doubled. I'm not sure if that's possible or not, but for argument's sake, let's say it's Anderson, Garner and James Hill on your bench and they get the DEFCONs in both games of a double game week. Well, then you're looking at, 8 points from each of those 3 players before anything else is added on. You've got 8 points from Hill from DEFCONs. You've got 8 points from Anderson and 8 points from Garner just from the DEFCONs in a double game week, Can one of them grab an attack in return? If they do, that 24 points from those 3 players, 27 points. If they get a couple of bonus, it's 29 points. And that's even before we look at the goalkeeper, who, if you get a goalkeeper that keeps a clean sheet, that's another 8 points. You could be talking from 1 attack in return and 1 clean sheet on a bench boost, a 40-point bench boost. So I do think the bench boost is very powerful this year. And even if you don't have 15 doublers. Like my man, the D Unit, I mentioned him before, he's adamant the bench boost is overplayed because it's going to be hard to get 15 doublers. You don't need 15 doublers. You don't need 15 doublers on the bench. All you need for the bench boost to work in a double game week is 3 players on your bench who you wouldn't otherwise play who have doubles. You know, if Haaland has a single game week, if Salah has a single game week, Florian Wirtz, you're not going to bench them. And if you are, then that's even another reason to play the bench boost, because these are the sort of players that can get them double figure hauls in one game. So I do think the bench boost, it's always been a favoured trip of mine, and that is the big risk with the early wildcard, is that the bench boost becomes a little bit harder. Not impossible, because it's just not impossible to do, because there are ways around it. Now, we'll get into that in the pros of the early wildcard. These next 5 game weeks are the only time left in this season to make those huge gains in rank. Now, I am 1.5 million in the world right now. Might probably improve a little bit after the Arsenal match tonight, because I have triple captain Gabriel, I have Timber, I have Rice. Surely that's going to go up a bit. Ideally, it would go up a lot, but we can't bank on that, can we? I mean, these are highly popular players, and, you know, fair enough, it is an easy fixture on paper, but Wolves scored against Arsenal in the return game, and they're a better team now, so it's not guaranteed. So anyway, yeah, these next 5 game weeks are the only time left to make the huge gains in rank, because, like, we talk about how the game is harder than ever. We talk about how managers are more engaged than ever, and yet we still think in the back of our head, if we wildcard in game week 32, that's the advantage, because all the other managers, all the casuals, aren't going to understand the strategy. But I'll put it to you, if they're more engaged than ever, and they are, because Ragabolly from livefpl.net, perhaps the greatest FPL website that out there, up there with FPL Team, those are the 2 main ones for me. He said in the last 4 game weeks, 8 million teams have still been active in the game. 8 million teams have made changes. That's 2/3 of the field. Now, I'm 1.5 million in the world, and from the very rudimentary maths, that means a million managers ahead of me are still active. 1 million managers ahead of me are still engaged in the game, and they are going to be well aware of the game week 32 wildcard strategy. I mean, the game's easier than ever. You've got all the big names. They're all putting out the YouTube shorts, the TikToks. You don't have to spend a lot of time studying the game to know what's going on nowadays. You don't have to spend... You can go and have a sit down on your porcelain throne in your bathroom, and in the span of 5 minutes, you can have high quality tactical advice from 5 different FPL managers who know the game. You can watch, Big Andy, you can watch Fran, you can watch FPL Mate, you can watch, James from Planet FPL. You can see them all. And in that 5 minutes, fine well, the strategy is the game week 32 wildcard, the game week 33 bench boost, the 34 free hit, and then take it from there. You're not sure what to do, just wait until the game week 32 wildcard, because they will all be putting out a TikTok or a YouTube short that in the span of a minute, for Big Andy say, you can see exactly who, a man ranked 2,000 in the world with 500,000 subscribers. You can get his wildcard draft in 60 seconds or less, 60 seconds or fewer. And, so to think we're going to make these massive gains over the casuals just because we invest more time, just because historically that has been so, is completely underestimating the impact of short form content on the quality of the casual manager. I mean, in many ways, obsessing as much as I do, as much as I'm sure you do at times, could even be the detriment because we overthink. All they do is just, look at a couple of shorts and get the best advice from the managers they deem the best and just go with that. So I actually think it's going to be harder than ever to make gains post game week 32 because we'll all have the same teams. Well, I won't, And I mean, this is the other advantage, going early. Like this whole 1 million managers ahead of me with the same team, 8 million managers all on Wildcard 32, if that is the common strategy. Do you know what that means? That means I have 5 game weeks where they won't be making the extra points, where they will be ignoring these great players. They will be ignoring the great assets available. I could have triple Brentford this weekend. I could have triple Liverpool attack. I could have Ryan of Bournemouth. I could have, James Hill. I could have Aston Villa players. Cole Palmer, Joao Pedro. I mean, a lot of people will have them already. The people waiting for game week 32, they might have some of them, but they won't have all of them. Who's going to bring in Semenyo when you've got people like Andy and FPL Harry all telling you it's not worth it? There are other players who don't blank who could match him, and it is true. Of course it is. But that is an advantage for me. That is an opportunity for me. And that is the key pro for this approach, because by game week 32, by the game week 32 wildcard, I will still end up with a very similar team. I have, between now and game week 33, I have 7 free transfers to make. Now, in my last video, I had a few people say, oh, he's talking nonsense, he's had a blunder. You can only roll up to 5 transfers. Of course I can, but what I'm saying is I've got 7 free transfers to use by game week 33. So by game week 31, the blank, I have to use 1 transfer. Great stuff. I can bring in Harry Wilson perhaps for that Burnley game in game week 31. Excuse me, that's 1 transfer used, 5 to roll. In game week 32, when everyone's wildcard, and I can make 1 more transfer. That's 2 transfers used, and I'm rolling 5 into game week 33, where I am prepared to take a 12-point hit. I'm going to tell you a quick little story about hits in the double game weeks. People think, oh, you can't do that. Well, I'll tell you about a man named Wee Ginger Ben, and he is from the League of Gentlemen. And a few years ago, he took a -20 in the big double game week, a -20. Starting 20 points behind the field, and he beat them all except me. He got 151 points that week. So you take off that 20, it's 131 points in 1 game week, and nobody else in the division beat that. So taking hits in a double game week is absolutely fine, because a lot of the time you're selling single game week players, you are selling maybe injured players. So that's fine. I've got no problem. So if I'm prepared to take a -12, then that's 2 transfers, 1 transfer before game week 31, another before 32, and then 5 transfers plus 3 hits in game week 33. I can get whatever team I want. I can, fair enough, I'm talking about selling Haaland. It's easy to get him back in if needed. I'd just sell Salah and Ekitike and get Haaland and a nice midfielder, a Ryan or a Dango or Harry Wilson or, someone even more expensive. It's not a problem. Anthony Gordon. It's not a problem for me to get Haaland back if I've got more Salah. So that is my argument. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to explain my thinking. Game week 32, game week 33, we're all going to have very similar teams, dictated by the fixtures, dictated by the doubles and the blanks. So I've got 5 game weeks until we are all shut out of the massive gains. 5 game weeks to really drive home a chance to climb up from 1.5 million. I am trying for the top 100k. I'm not officially ruling out top 10k yet. And that might sound ridiculous because I'm about 153 points off it and there's 12 game weeks to go. I'll need a lot of luck. It probably won't happen, but I am a dreamer. They call me the FPL Nightmare because my dreams are so vivid. My fantasies are they're so tangible. And I think I can do it. Well, I don't think I can get top 10k, but I think I can get 100k. I'm only 103 points off. It's a lot. These are engaged managers ahead of me, so I have to take the opportunity. I have to take the chance. You know, you're not going to outpoint Floyd Mayweather over 12 rounds. But if you get in early and you can get the uppercut, you can get the right hook, maybe you can knock him out. I don't know. You know, maybe, I don't know. All I know is it's my best chance. And you know what? If Man City get beat by Newcastle at St James's Park in the FA Cup, like they did in the league earlier in the season, if Newcastle can pull off that result, then Man City might not even double. And then everybody will be selling Haaland for Salah. You know, if Haaland is injured and Salah gets a brace this weekend, this is the question. I'm going to get onto it in more detail now, because the big question is whether to wildcard in 27 like I originally planned, or to delay it just 1 week. And this has come from a conversation I had with FPL D Unit. And I talk to the Pubcast lads about my strategies a lot because they are a bit out there. And the Pubcast is such a great show because it has such a range of opinions. You've got the wily veteran Nick Trigger with his, you know, safe, steady, cautious approach that yields success. You've got Gary, who, you know, is a big analytics man. You've got D Unit and myself, we're risk takers, we're experimental. You've got Kanji, who is what I would call a reckless review user. He likes the projections, but he likes to use them to take hits. And then you've got whatever Roberto is. He never shows up enough in the chats to really understand anymore. And I was talking to the D Unit, and he was saying, you know, why not just get in Palmer and Joao Pedro now, ignore Salah and go from there, save your wild card? And I thought, no, I'm not going to do that, because the whole point of wildcarding is to get more Salah. The whole point of wildcarding is to get the whole team different from what it is now. To break out from that like kind of DEFCON heavy safe team, to go for these explosive players who can attack, these explosive players who can get me those big hauls in any given game week. So I'm not wildcarding without salary. He said, why not wildcard and just keep Haaland? And I say, well, what's the point in that? There's no point. Because if I'm keeping Haaland, there's, you know, what is the purpose? I can just use my transfers. But another thing he said, why not just sell Haaland for Joao Pedro and then, you know, see what happens? You don't need Palmer, just get Joao Pedro and Mo Salah in for Haaland and Guimaraes. And, you know, it's not a bad idea. It's one with merit, but it doesn't include Cole Palmer. Why would you get the man who wins the penalties, but not the man who takes them? You know? Why would you get the man with 12-point potential, but not the man with 20? You know? But what the D Unit did was get me to think about this wildcard a bit differently. And I have 2 free transfers in the bank. What if I delay for 1 week and I activate my wildcard on Saturday night rather than Saturday morning, and instead this week I bring in Palmer and Joao Pedro for Bruno Guimaraes and Erling Haaland? See, this is interesting. This is, you know, there's pros and cons to this approach. Now, the reason is, if I do that, I can then wildcard Palmer and Pedro back out in game week 28, and I am not stuck with Palmer. And you say stuck with him. He's not got the best games, but he's got, you know, Arsenal's a tough game, but I feel like Aston Villa, Newcastle, Everton, I don't think they're tough for Palmer, because their weaknesses are in the spaces where Palmer operates. Excuse me again, burping a lot, pardon me. So I'm happy to keep Palmer for them fixtures. But is there a better opportunity? Now you look at my team for game week 27. If I wildcard in 27, Kelleher, Hill, Gabriel Munoz, Palmer, Fernandez, Salah, Dango, Semenyo, Thiago Ekitike, Dubravka, Krupa Jr., Mukiele and Rodon on the bench. It's a great wildcard. That is a great wildcard. Very little selection dilemmas, which is a good thing. I don't want to be exacting brain power trying to weigh up which midfielder or striker to start. Krupa Jr. can just be benched and forgotten about. And if he comes on, fair enough. That people say he's not starting for Bournemouth. True. But in 7 substitute appearances, he's got 3 goals. So he can still do the damage. The only decision would be Hill or Mukiele each week or Rodon in the odd week. It is handy. It's a good wild card. I like it. I like it a lot. And I might still go for it. I might, but it would be remiss of me not to weigh up the options. Like, if we look at the game week 28 wildcard potential, what that would mean is bringing in Palmer and Joao Pedro this week. And if I do that for the free transfers, then my team is Henderson and Munoz against Wolves, Timber, Gabriel Rice against Tottenham, Mukiele against Fulham, or Anderson against Liverpool. Then it's Palmer and Pedro against Burnley, it's Bruno Fernandes against Everton, Thiago against Brighton and Ekitike against Forest. It's very strong, very strong. And what I like about it, for one, it's a bit safer, isn't it? Because you keep that Arsenal triple up for an extra game week against Spurs. Could they do the bit? I've just watched Spurs against Newcastle. It was terrible. You get Palmer and Pedro against the weakest defensive team in the league at home. And we've seen the damage they've done. But it's just a 1 game week play because then you can get rid of them next week. It's very aggressive. And then the bench would have obviously be Anderson, Garner and Tarkovsky, DEFCONs for days if anyone misses out. So I quite like that. I do. And I'm tempted because if I do that and I bring in Pedro and Palmer, then the wildcard in 28 is, this is a stronger wildcard. This is like this approach. If I delay for 1 week, it is a massive fixture attack. With captaincy, it could be a 40-point swing this week with Palmer, with Joao Pedro. If Haaland is injured, if Haaland gets a cameo from the bench, Guimaraes is already out. Fair enough. I'll probably start, Elliot Anderson or Mukiele. And then if I do that, then what if they don't get the DEFCONs? That's maybe Anderson and Haaland only get 3 points. Captain Palmer gets 40 and Joao Pedro gets 13. That's a 50-point swing from 1 game week. So that is something on my mind. Will Palmer get a hat-trick again? Unlikely. We have to be realistic. But we have to accept it's a possibility. And I am someone that likes to see the possibilities ahead of me. I need to weigh them up. And this is why I'm coming to you with this, because I've enjoyed the discussion on the big hit video when I talked of the -12. I enjoyed the discussion when I talked about the game week 27 wildcard. Now I need the discussion on the game week 28 wildcard with the Palmer and Pedro transfers. Because this is the other thing, because in game week 28, if I bring in Palmer and Pedro this week for free transfers, then I won't be able to use a transfer until game week 33. I have to use 2 free transfers. Whichever wildcard strategy I go for, I have to use 2 free transfers before game week 33. Wildcard 28 involves using them now, using them immediately. And then wildcarding next week into a draft. Now, this is what I've got at the minute. It's just a rough one. It would be refined. I've not looked into it in great detail, but it's Keller in goal with Dubravka as sub. The defence of Gabriel, Mukiele, Hill, Virgil van Dijk and Mateus Nunes. A midfield of Semenyo, Fernandes, Salah, Dango and Morgan Rogers. And then up front, it's Thiago and Ekitike, but instead of Krupi Jr., it's Calvert-Lewin on the bench. Now, I think that looks stronger. You know, you still have... It has more selection dilemmas, so it would be a bit of brain power, but you're talking quite an obvious starting 11 every week. You know, it's like the thing... Instead of looking at who to start, you're looking at, is there an opportunity for Mukiele, Calvert-Lewin or Hill to come off the bench? Maybe this week, maybe in game week 28 there is, because I can start Hill against Sunderland over Gabriel against Chelsea. That would be a good one, you know. Game week 29, Rodgers plays Chelsea. I could play him, that would be fine, or I could start Calvert-Lewin against Sunderland, you know. And this is what we have to consider. This is the big advantage of the game week 28 wildcard. And when I look at the team, obviously with getting Joao Pedro and Cole Palmer in this week, it does seem obvious. It seems like the obvious move, and then the wildcard into a stronger squad, a more balanced squad perhaps, but it does seem obvious. But there's one key thing to consider, and that is if I wildcard now, I get if I wildcard now, I get an advantage, and if I delay the wildcard, then I'm missing out on some big points potential. I'm missing out on Mo Salah against Nottingham Forest. I am missing out on Dango against Brighton at home. I'm missing out on Antoine Semenyo. I am missing out on James Hill against West Ham. Kelleher, you know, I've got Dean Henderson, and he could do well against Wolves, but he might not. It's not like they did well against Burnley. They conceded 3 goals. So, and I mean, that's one thing with delaying until 28. It means I can give Munoz the Wolves game and then get Mateus Nunes in instead. Or, you know, and I don't lose a player for the bench boost. I've just changed a player while giving giving Daniel Munoz the plum fixture against Wolves, and I think that's a good move. But if I wildcard now, I will be stuck with Munoz, and that's not a bad thing. It's never a bad thing to be stuck with someone like Daniel Munoz. But if I do wait, you know, fair enough, I get Joao Pedro, but I don't have Semenyo against Newcastle, fresh from Baku in Azerbaijan. I don't have Dango. I don't have Mo Salah, and that is the big one. Because if Haaland is injured this weekend and Salah scores twice, then everyone will have Mo Salah for game week 28. The opportunity will be missed. If everyone has Mo Salah next week, then there's almost no point in wildcarding in 28 because the advantage is gone. Game week 27 gives me the element of surprise. It is that sneak attack, that the blind side that you don't see coming. And maybe that's what I need. You know, maybe I need to put myself in that position where I have the chance of that big Salah haul before everybody else gets on him. That's the big key thing about wildcarding in 27. It's Mo Salah, it's Dango Ouattara, and it's Antoine Semenyo instead of James Garner, instead of Elliot Anderson, instead of whoever the other one is. I can't remember. You know, this is what I mean. It's a much stronger team this week. How many points do I want to risk leaving on the table? How many points do I want to risk other people? You know, lots of people have Joao Pedro. Not many have Mo Salah. Over 85% of managers do not have Mo Salah. If he scores a brace this weekend and Haaland is injured or even blanks, that number of people who do not have Mo Salah will be much smaller. So is the moment now? Can I afford to wait until game week 28, or will the opportunity be missed? There's pros and cons for both. And that's why I'm talking to you about it. The big advantage of the Game Week 28 wildcard. I get Joao Pedro and Cole Palmer for Burnley. Then I get rid and disperse the funds. Get the much stronger bench, which makes the bench boost much more viable in a single game week. You know, game week 30. I look at that team and I could be boosting Dubravka against Bournemouth, Hill against Burnley, Mukiele against Brighton, Calvert-Lewin against Crystal Palace. That's a good bench boost by anyone's stretch of the imagination. 29. I could bench boost Dubravka against Everton, Mukiele against Leeds, Calvert-Lewin against Sunderland, and Hill against Brentford. It's a good bench boost by any stretch of the imagination. So that's something to consider, but it does rule out that kind of DEFCON-ness, that DEFCON daddy 8 points minimum potential of the game week 33. And I am going to wait till game week 33. I am. That is my plan. I don't see any sense in going early because you're restricting opportunity. And yes, I am restricting the opportunity for myself by using the wild card so early. I'm restricting the game week 33 double game week opportunity by going early. But like I say, I'll have 5 transfers. 2 transfers used before that week. I'll have 5 in the week, plus, up to a -12, another 3. That's 8 transfers I would be prepared to use in game week 33. Like, I'm not getting rid of all these players. Even if they are single game weeks, you're not getting rid of the likes of Gabriel just because his only fixtures Man City. Just bench him, and a bench boost with Gabriel, there's always a good chance. Or, if I bring up game week 33, no, it doesn't. The game week 33 fixtures, let's have a look. Aston Villa, Morgan Rogers, if he doesn't double, he's still got Sunderland at home. Brentford don't double. Maybe I'll have to bench boost with triple Brentford on the bench, but I'll still have Kelleher, Dango and Igor Thiago at home to Fulham, Colms Fulham. And I know Fulham aren't as bad as people make out. They're not, but it's still a nice fixture to target for a team like Brentford. So I don't think the game week 32 wildcard is that detrimental. The other thing is, game week 32 has a lot of good fixtures. Arsenal play Bournemouth, Brentford play Everton, Aston Villa play Forest, Liverpool play Fulham, Man United play Leeds. Are people, if they don't have the doubles, people might be selling these players. All these wildcarders might be selling those players from these teams with great games in game week 32, and I'll have to keep them. And that could be the advantage for me in that week. It would not surprise me if game week 32 creates a cultural FPL moment of everybody wildcarding to a 20-point game week, to a 24-point game week average, and yet I get 50 points because I've got different players, because I can't overhaul the team and bring in a game week 33 team in game week 32. I will be bringing it in game week 33, which, you can say what you want. It's a risk. I'm not denying it is a risk. But it's a risk that I don't think is as much of a risk as those big name content creators will have you think. I don't think it's as much of a risk as those safety first managers will have you think. I don't think it's as much of a risk as the projection models will have you think. And the more I look at it, the more convinced I am that it's not a question of whether to wildcard early, it's a question of when I wildcard early. If it is Saturday morning for game week 27 or Saturday evening for game week 28. Because either way, the points are coming my way. I have had an awful lot of bad luck this season, and they say luck evens out over the course of a campaign. Well, it's time for my luck to come in, and I am putting myself in that position to get lucky. That wildcard will be activated on Wildcard Saturday. The only question is whether it is activated before the deadline or afterwards. Thank you for watching. We will see you next time.